Welcome to a place where the line between dreams and nightmares blurs, where shadows come alive and mysteries linger just beyond the light. I'm your guide through this haunting realm, where every whisper tells a story, and every story pulls you deeper into the unknown. Whether you find yourself here at Nightmare Lullabies or with Miss Nightmare, know that you are never truly alone in the dark. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Encounter. The darkness of the late evening was punctuated only by the distant hum of city life and the occasional flicker of headlights. The quiet, almost oppressive stillness was suddenly broken by the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. I had been working a late shift at the diner, a shift that blurred together into a haze of greasy dishes and tired patrons. As I wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time, I glanced at the clock, willing the minutes to pass more quickly. Little did I know, this night would become one I would never forget. When the door to the diner swung open, I barely looked up, absorbed in my task. It wasn't unusual to have late-night customers, especially in a place like this where time seemed to stretch endlessly. But then, a figure appeared in the doorway, framed by the harsh light from the street lamps outside. He was tall and imposing, his silhouette dark against the neon glow. There was something unsettling about his presence, a kind of dark energy that made the air feel thicker, heavier. I forced myself to glance up as he approached the counter. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, but I could sense them sweeping over me with a predatory intensity. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread and forced a smile. "Evening. What can I get you?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible despite the rising unease in my chest. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned on the counter, his gaze locked onto me with a chilling intensity. The silence stretched, each second dragging out like an eternity. "I need you to come outside with me," he finally said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. The casual menace in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I had seen enough crime dramas to know that this was not a good sign. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to call for help, but I knew better. There was no way I was walking out there alone with him. I raised my hands, trying to show that I meant no harm. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I don't know anything, and I haven't seen anything, okay?" His smirk was cold, devoid of any real amusement. "Oh, I think you've seen plenty. Now move, or I'll—" His threat trailed off, lost in the cacophony of flashing lights and sirens that erupted outside. The sudden burst of red and blue lights flooded the diner, their pulsating glow casting eerie shadows across the walls. The man's head whipped around, his face contorting into a mask of rage. "You little rat," he snarled, his hand reaching for a weapon concealed under his jacket. I didn't think. I acted purely on adrenaline. Grabbing the pot of hot coffee from behind the counter, I hurled it at him. The scalding liquid hit his face with a satisfying hiss, causing him to recoil and scream in pain. As he stumbled backward, I took the opportunity to vault over the counter and dash for the door. Outside, chaos reigned. The parking lot was a frenzy of police activity, with officers shouting orders and guns drawn. The van I had seen earlier was trying to reverse, but a police cruiser had it blocked. I burst out of the store, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I'm the one who called," I shouted, my voice trembling. Several officers turned their weapons towards me, their eyes wary. One of them rushed over, quickly ushering me behind a police car. "Stay down," he ordered, before sprinting back towards the store. From my vantage point, I watched as the scene unfolded. The men were being arrested, pulled from their trucks and the van. The sight of the girls, so many of them, was almost too much to bear. Some appeared dazed, others were crying. A few tried to flee, only to be gently but firmly stopped by female officers. The whole operation seemed to come to a rapid conclusion, but to me, it felt like hours had passed. When the dust finally settled, a detective came over to take my statement. As I spoke, I watched paramedics tending to the girls, wrapping them in blankets and leading them to waiting ambulances. The scene was a chaotic blend of relief and heartbreak. "You did good, son," the detective said when I finished. "Real good. We've been trying to crack this ring for months. Your information was the break we needed." I nodded, feeling numb. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. "What's going to happen to the girls?" I asked. The detective's face softened. "They'll get help, counseling, medical treatment, whatever they need. It's going to be a long road, but they've got a chance now, thanks to you." In the days that followed, the full scope of the operation came to light. It wasn't just big rigs. The ring had been operating out of truck stops across 3 states. Dozens of girls were rescued, some of whom had been missing for years. I gave more statements, testified in court. The truck stop's owner was arrested too. He'd been turning a blind eye in exchange for a cut of the profits. I was offered a reward, but I couldn't take it. Instead, I asked for it to be donated to organizations that help trafficking survivors. I don't work at big rigs anymore. I couldn't stand to be there after everything that happened, but I didn't give up on my dream of being a writer. In fact, I found my story. I'm writing about what happened, about the girls, about the dark world that exists right under our noses. Sometimes I think about that first girl, the one with the haunted eyes. I never found out what happened to her specifically, but I like to think she's out there somewhere, free, maybe even happy. And on the nights when the memories keep me awake, when I see those girls' faces in my dreams, I hold on to that thought. Because that's the thing about evil. It thrives in the shadows, in silence and complacency. But it only takes one person to shine a light, to speak up. One person can make a difference. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who was in the right place at the right time and chose not to look away. And if my story teaches people anything, I hope it's this. Pay attention, look out for each other, and if you see something wrong, say something. You never know whose life you might save. Chapter 2. Ravenswood Asylum. The crumbling facade of Ravenswood Asylum loomed before me, its broken windows staring down like hollow eyes. I'd come here looking for thrills, hoping for that perfect creepy photo to boost my urban exploration blog. Instead, I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted through decaying corridors by those who should have been long gone. Sometimes the dead don't rest easy, and the insane never truly leave. My name's Maya, and I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something hauntingly beautiful about a building left to decay, nature slowly reclaiming what man has discarded. I run a fairly popular blog showcasing my urban exploration adventures, and when I heard about Ravenswood, I knew it would be my masterpiece. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, shut down after a series of scandals involving patient abuse and unethical experiments. Local legends spoke of hauntings, of screams echoing through the empty halls at night. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I believed in the power of a good story. I arrived just before sunset, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder. The fence surrounding the property was rusted and bent, easy enough to slip through. As I approached the main building, a chill ran down my spine, not entirely due to the cool evening air. The front door hung off its hinges, creaking ominously in the breeze. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling wallpaper and debris-strewn floors. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. I moved deeper into the building, my camera clicking away. Every shadow, every broken piece of furniture told a story. I imagined the lives that had been lived and lost within these walls. It was as I was setting up a shot in what must have been a patient room that I first heard it, a shuffling sound coming from the corridor outside. I froze, listening intently. It could have been the building settling, I told myself, or maybe an animal that had found its way inside. But then I heard something else, a voice, faint and distant, calling out. "Hello? Is someone there? Please, I need help." My heart started racing. Had another urban explorer gotten hurt, or was this some kind of trap? Against my better judgment, I moved towards the sound. "Hello?" I called out. "Where are you?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Here! I'm here! Please, help me!" I rounded a corner, and my flashlight beam fell on a figure huddled against the wall. It was a young woman dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned hospital gown. She squinted in the sudden light, raising a hand to shield her eyes. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I thought no one would ever come." Something felt off about her clothes, her manner of speaking. It was all wrong, but she seemed desperate, and my instincts told me to help. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I'm fine. I've been trapped here. They're still here, the doctors. They keep coming for me." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced around the hallway, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. "Who's coming for you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The doctors," she repeated, her voice trembling. "They did experiments on us. They never let us leave. I thought I was the only one left, but they're still here. They never left." I didn't fully understand what she was saying, but I knew I needed to get her out of there. "Come on," I said, offering her my hand. "We need to get out of here." As soon as I touched her, I felt a sudden coldness seep into my bones, as if I had touched something far colder than the air should be. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "No, don't," she cried. "They'll know." Before I could react, the lights flickered, and a deafening roar echoed through the hallway. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the temperature dropped drastically. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. I could hear the woman's panicked breathing beside me, her grip on my hand growing tighter. I tried to calm her, but it was as if the asylum itself was coming alive, reacting to our intrusion. I stumbled backward, trying to find my way out. The woman's cries were growing fainter, swallowed by the cacophony of the asylum's groans. Every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the labyrinth of corridors, the layout shifting and changing in a maddening pattern. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought to maintain my composure. The building felt like it was closing in on me, its oppressive presence suffocating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted a faint light ahead. I hurried towards it, desperate for escape. As I reached the exit, I glanced back to see if the woman was following. To my horror, she was nowhere to be seen. The hallway behind me was empty, and the oppressive silence was even more unsettling than the previous noise. Outside, the night air was a welcome relief. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The events of the past few hours replayed in my mind, a chaotic blur of fear and confusion. I had come for a story, but what I found was something far more terrifying. Chapter 3. Echoes of Ravenswood. In the days that followed my escape from Ravenswood Asylum, I tried to process what I had experienced. I returned to the asylum several times, hoping to find some explanation, but each visit only deepened the mystery. The building was always the same, silent and empty, its secrets locked away behind its rotting walls. My blog post about the asylum went viral, drawing attention from paranormal enthusiasts and amateur sleuths. Many reached out with their own theories and experiences, but no one seemed to have a clear answer. Some claimed the asylum was built on cursed land. Others spoke of ghostly apparitions and residual hauntings. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I continued my research, driven by a need to understand what I had witnessed. I dug into the asylum's history, uncovering documents and old newspaper articles. The asylum had a dark past, with numerous accounts of patient mistreatment and unethical experiments. Many patients had disappeared without a trace, their fates unknown. One evening, I stumbled upon an old journal at a local library. It belonged to Dr. Elias Finch, one of the asylum's chief physicians. The journal detailed various experiments conducted on patients, including lobotomies and electroshock therapy. The final entries were particularly unsettling, describing increasingly erratic behavior among the staff and patients. Dr. Finch's last entry was a frantic scrawl about something being unleashed within the asylum, something that could not be contained. As I read through the journal, a chilling realization washed over me. The experiments Dr. Finch described were not just physical, they seemed to delve into the very essence of the human psyche. The asylum had been a place where the boundary between reality and madness blurred, and perhaps something had been unleashed that defied comprehension. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to Ravenswood one last time, this time armed with new knowledge. I ventured deeper into the asylum than ever before, exploring forgotten rooms and hidden passages. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the asylum's grim history. In one room, I found a series of old medical records scattered across the floor. Among them were notes about a patient 37, whose records were marked with disturbing annotations. The notes described extreme psychological distress and delusions of being pursued by unseen forces. As I read through the records, I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive weight. I continued my search, driven by a sense of urgency. The building seemed to react to my presence, its walls whispering and groaning as if alive. I reached a room marked as the observation chamber, where patients had been monitored during experiments. The room was eerily intact, with observation windows and old restraints still visible. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the observation window. It was the woman from before, her eyes wide with terror. I rushed to the window, but she was gone. The room grew colder, and I could feel the presence of something malevolent. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. I backed away, my heart racing. As I turned to leave, I heard a low, guttural sound behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The shadows seemed to pulse and shift, and I could feel an unseen force pressing in on me. I sprinted for the exit, the asylum's labyrinthine corridors twisting and turning as if determined to keep me inside. When I finally burst out into the night, I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The asylum stood behind me, its dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. I knew I had uncovered only a fraction of its secrets, but I also knew I had to leave. Ravenswood Asylum was a place where the past and present converged, where the boundary between reality and madness was perilously thin. Chapter 4. The Haunting Legacy. In the months that followed, the story of Ravenswood Asylum gained widespread attention. Documentaries were made, books were written, and theories proliferated. Some believed it was a haven for spirits seeking justice. Others thought it was a place where the boundaries of reality had been forever shattered. My blog became a focal point for discussions about the asylum, and while the attention was overwhelming, it also made me wary. I had hoped to find closure, to make sense of what I had experienced, but Ravenswood had left an indelible mark on me. The nightmares persisted, the shadows seemed to follow me wherever I went. I could no longer distinguish between the echoes of the asylum and the fears of my own mind. The line between reality and illusion had blurred. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I received a package. It was a small, unmarked box with no return address. Inside, I found a series of old photographs, images of the asylum, but they were different from any I had seen before. They depicted scenes from the past, doctors in their uniforms, patients in their rooms, and something else. Figures lurking in the background, their faces obscured by shadow. Among the photographs was a note, written in an elegant, flowing script. It read, "The past never truly fades. It waits, hidden in the shadows. Beware, for some doors, once opened, can never be closed." The note sent a chill down my spine. Ravenswood had become a part of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. I began receiving more correspondence, cryptic messages that hinted at a deeper conspiracy, a connection between the asylum's experiments and a broader, more sinister network. I decided to delve deeper, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. My research took me to old archives, forgotten records, and hidden documents. What I uncovered was a web of deceit and manipulation, with Ravenswood Asylum at the center of a far-reaching network of unethical experiments. The asylum's experiments were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger, more insidious project involving several institutions across the country. The aim was to unlock the human mind's full potential, but at a terrible cost. Patients were subjected to extreme psychological stress, with the goal of pushing them to the brink of madness and beyond. I discovered connections between Ravenswood and various high-profile figures, including politicians and businessmen. The experiments were funded by clandestine organizations with far-reaching agendas. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous my investigation became. One night, as I pored over the documents in my apartment, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. There was no one there. I opened the door slowly, and as I stepped into the hallway, I saw a figure disappearing around the corner. I rushed after them, but they were gone. On the ground, where they had stood, I found another note. It read, "You're digging too deep. Some things are better left buried." The warning was clear, but I couldn't stop. The truth needed to be exposed, no matter the cost. I continued my research, piecing together the fragments of a dark and convoluted puzzle. Chapter 5. The Final Revelation. My quest for the truth led me to a secluded location, a remote facility that seemed to have been abandoned for years. The documents hinted at its significance, suggesting that it held the key to understanding the true scope of Ravenswood Asylum's experiments. As I approached the facility, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. The building was dilapidated, its walls covered in grime and decay. The air was thick with the smell of rot and neglect. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was a mirror image of Ravenswood, broken furniture, scattered papers, and an eerie silence that seemed to amplify every sound. I moved cautiously through the building, following the clues from my research. Each room seemed to reveal more about the experiments, the methods used, and the people involved. In the basement, I found a series of locked files and documents. With a combination of luck and determination, I managed to break into the storage room. Inside, I discovered detailed records of the experiments, including names, dates, and results. The scope of the project was staggering. It wasn't just about unlocking the mind's potential, it was about controlling it, manipulating it to serve hidden agendas. I also found a set of video recordings, dated from the early 1970s. They showed patients undergoing various procedures, their faces contorted in pain and fear. The footage was disturbing, a stark reminder of the inhumanity that had taken place. But among the recordings was something else, a confession from Dr. Elias Finch. In the confession, Dr. Finch spoke of the horrors he had witnessed, of the experiments that had gone wrong, and of the dark forces he believed had been unleashed. His final words were a chilling plea for someone to stop the madness, to put an end to the suffering. With the evidence in hand, I knew I had to act quickly. I contacted authorities and provided them with the documentation. The investigation into the network of unethical experiments was launched, and the facility was shut down. The truth was finally exposed, and the individuals responsible were brought to justice. The aftermath was a whirlwind of media coverage and legal battles. The story of Ravenswood Asylum and its dark legacy became a focal point for discussions about ethics in scientific research. The asylum itself was condemned, its doors permanently closed. As for me, I took a step back from the limelight. The experience had taken a toll on me, and I needed time to process everything. I continued to write, but my focus shifted to more personal stories, ones that explored the human condition rather than the macabre. Ravenswood Asylum was no longer a place of nightmares. It had become a symbol of resilience and the power of truth. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there is hope. And while the shadows of Ravenswood still lingered in my memories, I found solace in knowing that I had shed light on its darkest secrets. The echoes of Ravenswood would always be with me, but they no longer held power over my life. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, knowing that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with the courage to seek the truth. Epilogue. The Whisper of Ravenswood. Even now, as I sit in the quiet of my home, I can't shake the feeling that Ravenswood Asylum is still watching, still whispering its dark secrets into the night. I've come to accept that some places never truly let go, that their stories remain intertwined with our own. The asylum's legacy lives on in the stories shared by those who experienced its horrors and in the collective memory of those who seek to understand its past. It is a reminder that the shadows of history are always present, and that we must confront them with courage and compassion. As I look back on my journey, I am filled with a sense of both accomplishment and humility. Ravenswood was a chapter in my life that tested my resolve and shaped my understanding of the world. It taught me that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, there is always a glimmer of hope. And so, as I continue my work, I carry with me the lessons learned from Ravenswood. The asylum may be gone, but its story endures. It is a testament to the enduring power of truth and the strength of the human spirit. In the quiet moments when the night is still and the world outside is asleep, I sometimes hear the faintest whisper, a reminder that the past is never truly behind us, and that the search for truth is an ongoing journey. Ravenswood may have been a dark chapter, but it is one that will forever be etched in my memory. After wandering through endless tunnels, I unexpectedly dropped onto a wet, muddy surface. It startled me, given that all I'd seen for what felt like days were jagged rock slopes. Rising cautiously, I surveyed the space. A warm, mist-filled cavern, about 10 meters across. Water dripped slowly from the stalactites above, pooling into thick mud below. Curiosity led me to take a few steps, only for my foot to catch on something hard, sending me stumbling forward. When I looked to see what had caused my fall, I froze. A skeleton lay half buried in the mud, disturbingly close to human in size. My heart quickened as I knelt beside it, fear tugging at the edges of my mind. But this wasn't human. The skull resembled more of a reptile's, and the bones, while solid and robust, were hollow, almost bird-like. It had 8 limbs. 4 appeared like arms, 2 more like legs, and the last pair seemed to serve both functions. Each limb ended in strange finger-like digits. Its ribs expanded in a way that reminded me of a turtle's shell, protecting most of its torso. This was no ordinary skeleton. It seemed to be a blend of insect and tortoise. I glanced around the chamber and spotted more of them, partially submerged in the mud. A sickening realization settled in. This was another species, something long dead yet alien to anything known by humankind. An uncomfortable memory surfaced of that encounter I had in the dark, a creature I'd only heard but never seen. Could these skeletal remains be related? Were they remnants of beings that once inhabited the depths? I felt nauseated at the thought, my mind racing with questions I wished I didn't have to answer. Suddenly, all I wanted was to escape this cursed room. I hurried, mud clinging to my boots, questions echoing in my skull. How long had these things lived here? Were they intelligent? Could they still be alive? And worst of all, what if they weren't the only ones? My nightmares from the cave returned in a wave of dread, and I couldn't push them away. I found a downward slope, steep and slick with mud, but without hesitation, I threw myself onto it, sliding down, desperate to leave the bizarre skeletons behind. At the bottom, I found myself on rocky terrain, though still damp. Ahead, however, there was only darkness. My torch, though still functioning, seemed ineffective, its beam swallowed entirely by the abyss in front of me. Looking around, I realized I was perched on a ledge running along a cave wall, but I couldn't gauge how far the void extended or how deep it plunged. My light touched nothing but emptiness. A new kind of fear gripped me, a terror unlike anything I'd felt before. The darkness of the caves up until now had always felt alive, like it was watching me, taking pleasure in my fear. This was different. This darkness was vast, indifferent, uncaring. It stretched on without end, as if the world simply stopped here, vanishing into nothingness. The feeling of insignificance, of being utterly forgotten by the universe, was overwhelming. It was as if I'd gazed into the eyes of a cold, uncaring God, one who didn't even notice my existence. Shaken to my core, I stood there for what felt like hours, paralyzed by the void. Then, faintly at first, I heard it again, that infernal sound. The siren, calling to me once more. I didn't want to listen, but something in me moved, my legs unwillingly carrying me down the narrow path along the wall. As I walked, I tried to reason with myself. This was just another cavern. But its enormity defied logic. How could something this vast exist under the earth without collapsing under its own weight? Was it natural, or had it been shaped by something else? The thought occurred to me. What if this place had been carved out by something alive? Something so large it required a space this immense. Hours passed, the haunting call of the siren fading in and out. Eventually, I stumbled across an exit, a small tunnel branching off from the main path. Without a second thought, I took it, crawling and sliding through the narrow space. It opened into a chamber much like the others I'd seen, though this one seemed more ordinary, with nothing unusual but the entrance to a deep shaft. I hesitated only briefly before climbing down and following the passageway it led to. By now, exhaustion had become an overwhelming force. I placed my gear down, turned off my light, and curled up on the cold stone floor, hoping for a few hours of restless sleep. In my dreams, I no longer saw the haunting figures of the caves. Instead, I was haunted by the life I'd left behind. The faces of those I'd abandoned flashed before me, their voices accusing. I was trapped not just physically, but in a deeper sense, bound by the choices that had led me here. I wept in my sleep, praying for a way out, wishing with all my heart to return to the surface. When I awoke, things were different. There was light, not the harsh, artificial glow of my torch, but the soft, natural kind. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could there truly be light down here? I stood, disbelieving, and looked around. My torch was off, yet I could still make out the walls of the passage. Turning my light on and off confirmed it. There was light filtering in from somewhere ahead. Hope surged through me as I hurried forward, nearly running through the tunnel now. The air grew damp, and then I saw it, a faint golden glow at the tunnel's end. When I reached the opening, I stepped out into a world I could hardly comprehend. It was a city, or what remained of one, buried deep beneath the earth. Vast and sprawling, it stretched out before me, with buildings carved into the stone walls of a massive valley. Bridges crisscrossed between towering spires, and at the center stood an imposing ziggurat, reaching up toward a crack in the ceiling miles above, where daylight poured in like a distant promise of freedom. But something was wrong. The city was dead, overgrown with vines and moss, its streets silent, except for the faint sounds of distant wildlife. Yet the sight of it sent a chill through me. This place. This was no human construction. And though it appeared abandoned, the feeling of being watched crept back into my mind, stronger than ever. I backed away from the entrance, my heart sinking as the enormity of my situation weighed down on me again. I couldn't stay here, but going forward into the ruins seemed like walking into the jaws of some waiting beast. For a long while, I leaned against the wall, consumed by despair. My mind toyed with the idea of ending it all right here. It felt easier, safer, than facing whatever horrors might lie ahead. But as my eyes traced the network of bridges up to the crack of light far above, I realized there was a path. It was possible, just barely, that I could make it back to the surface. With that tiny glimmer of hope igniting within me, I forced myself to move again. I stayed close to the wall, crouching low as I made my way through the ruins. The buildings here were covered in strange carvings, none of which I understood or dared to study. Yet one image appeared repeatedly, a massive, formless creature, like a slug crossed with a spider, etched into the stone over and over. The heat grew more oppressive as I ventured deeper, steam rising from vents in the ground. It was as if the earth itself was alive, breathing its hot breath through cracks in the pavement. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows. At last, I reached the base of the ramp leading upward. My heart pounded with anticipation as I began to run, desperate to escape this nightmare once and for all. But just as I reached the ramp, that sound returned, the siren's call, louder now, echoing through the empty city. It pulled at me, insistent, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I stopped, breathless and confused. The path home was right there, yet the siren called me in the opposite direction. My eyes scanned the ruins, and then I saw it. Another cave, hidden in the mist, beckoning me toward it. "No," I whispered to myself. "I'm done with this. I want to go home." But the sound persisted, gnawing at my resolve. My torch flickered and died, leaving me in the dark, and the choice stood before me: ascend to the surface, or descend once more into the unknown. Two paths lay ahead. My parents died in a car accident on their way home after dropping me off for my first year at university. I never got the chance to call them and let them know I had settled in. While they lay bleeding on the pavement, I was decorating my room in oblivion. The only reason I survived that period of my life was because of my roommate, Marcus. I was devastated, spending days buried under the covers, shifting between rage and overwhelming sadness. The only person who tried to comfort me was Marcus, a stranger who could have easily kept his distance but didn't. He would sit beside me as I swung from one emotional extreme to another, listening while I struggled through the stages of grief. The only food I ate was prepared by him, and my only human interaction revolved around my feelings and the depth of his unwavering eyes. His kindness and loyalty saved me. During our conversations, Marcus convinced me to stay in school, reminding me that I had no home to return to. I was an only child, and my parents had been orphaned young, leaving me with no relatives. He made a compelling argument. Why leave and fade into nothing when I could stay and create a life for myself? "There's honor in sadness, but not in giving up," he would say. It was an old-fashioned sentiment, but it resonated with me. Marcus had a way about him, like someone from another time. Even now, years after climbing out of that pit of despair, I think back on his grace and wonder if I could ever show such strength. Marcus had become my family. He was my brother, and I owed him my life. Despite supporting me, Marcus managed to keep his grades up and even spoke with the dean to help delay my academic start. I'm proud to have eventually finished my degree, but I know I couldn't have done it without him. I used to joke that his name should be on the diploma too. After college, we both became writers, though we followed different paths. I dabbled in nonfiction, trying to emulate voices like Anthony Bourdain or Hunter S. Thompson, scraping by. Marcus, on the other hand, dedicated himself to exposing environmental corruption. While he no doubt made enemies in the fossil fuel industry, I found myself blacklisted from a few NYC restaurants for my outspoken reviews. The only thing that ever bothered me about Marcus was his reluctance to talk about his family. We never discussed it, not once. All he ever said was that they lived in a remote part of Northern California and that he had left them behind. I tried to pry, but he remained firm in his silence. So when he called me one day and asked if I'd accompany him to his sister's funeral, I was shocked. Of course, I immediately agreed to support him however he needed. We met in San Francisco, arriving from different corners of the world, and rented a car to drive the 6 hours north to the farthest edges of the state. The drive was quiet, winding through farmland and forested lakes, past volcanic plains. I knew Marcus well enough to let him speak when he was ready. "It's strange how the rocks never change, isn't it?" he said suddenly, smiling at the oddity of his observation. "My childhood didn't have street names, just landmarks based on where the rocks were." It was the first thing he'd said since we stopped in Weed, a small town with a funny name off the interstate. I still have the lighter he insisted I buy there. "Well, I'm not surprised. There are more rocks than trees around here," I replied. Eventually, we turned off the highway somewhere near Eerie and onto a dirt road. That's when Marcus's demeanor began to shift. "My family is different from anything you could imagine. This place is different. You've probably heard of the Lemurians?" "Yeah, those people who supposedly live inside Mount Shasta, right?" "No way, are you a Lemurian?" I joked, raising my eyebrows. "Of course not, but there are people who believe, and they're not entirely wrong to think there's something special about this land." I frowned, confused. Marcus had never struck me as irrational. There aren't people living inside the mountain, at least not that I know of. But my family, my ancestors, have spent generations out here searching. A community was built long ago to uncover the mountain's meaning, to understand the power it holds for those willing to accept it. My family, and others like them, lived nomadically, disconnected from society, always seeking the truth that lies out here. Though I had always promised myself I'd support Marcus however I could, his words unsettled me. Still, I was determined to keep my promise. "Marcus, that sounds crazy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He gave me a small, grim smile. "Now you know why I never talked about it." For the next hour, we drove in silence down a dirt road that seemed to stretch into nowhere. I peppered him with questions, but he didn't answer any of them. When he finally stopped the car on the side of the road, he turned to me, tears welling up in his eyes. "Charlie, I'm sorry I had to bring you here like this. I couldn't have explained it in a way that made sense, but you need to trust me. I won't let anything happen to you. I just need your help, and everything will be okay." He stepped out of the car and motioned for me to follow. As soon as I closed my door, gunshots rang through the air. Marcus fired a handgun I hadn't known he had, 3 shots straight into the sky. I screamed, startled. "We have to walk the rest of the way, brother," he said, his eyes filled with sorrow I had never seen before. I had already made my choice long ago. I trusted Marcus, and I wasn't going to back out now. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady. We walked into the darkness as the sun set, leaving me blind, though I kept my hand firmly on the back of Marcus's coat to guide me. He moved confidently, like he knew exactly where we were headed. Time stretched endlessly as we trudged through the wilderness, and while I couldn't see our destination, I never once felt afraid. I trusted Marcus completely. What did scare me, though, was the worry I felt for him. Eventually, a structure emerged from the darkness, a large yurt made of animal hides, surrounded by smaller ones. Torches illuminated a towering column of smoke rising from the center of the tent. 2 men stood outside, clearly expecting us. Marcus saluted them with a gesture I didn't recognize, and they allowed us inside. It was unbearably hot inside the yurt, filled with people who looked more like they belonged in an ancient civilization than modern California. Naked children ran around, and bearded men with braided hair and weapons stood still, watching us. In the center of the tent sat 2 chairs, a pit of glowing coals, and a large tarped object. All eyes turned toward us as we entered. The man on the throne, who I assumed was Marcus's father, regarded him with a mix of love and contempt. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Of course, father," Marcus replied respectfully. "She was my sister." After a tense exchange, Marcus's father asked him to speak of his sister, and with great emotion, Marcus honored her memory. Then, with no warning, the shroud was pulled away to reveal the crucified remains of his sister decomposing before my eyes. The smell hit me like a wall, and I vomited into the pit of coals, barely able to stand. But Marcus was calm, his hand resting on my back. The ceremony that followed was something I could barely comprehend. It felt ancient, primal, as if I had stepped into another world. Marcus was asked to kneel in front of the remains of his sister and lie in the burning pit with her. Without hesitation, he did. His flesh burned, but he didn't scream. When it was over, I was told to carry him, just as he had once carried me through my grief. Naked and burned, I lifted Marcus onto my back and walked out into the cold night. Somehow, through sheer will, I carried him back to the car. We drove to a motel where he made me fill a bathtub with ice and lay him in it. For 3 days, I sat by that tub, convinced I was watching him die. But on the 3rd day, Marcus called out to me, unburned but changed. Our bond had deepened, and I could feel the presence of something more, something ancient and powerful. We left after a few more days and returned to the mountain to say goodbye, though there was no sign of his family. We paid a steep cleaning fee for the rental car and went our separate ways. That was the last time I spoke to Marcus. It's been 10 years now, but I still feel him with me. We're connected, not just by blood, but by something much deeper. A few days ago, I sensed it before he even called. His father had died. And now, it's time for another funeral. Upon the backs of our brothers, upon the backs of our sisters, is carried the future of our people. I didn't want to wear glasses anymore, so my father and I decided to book a ticket to Kayseri, Turkey. The eye doctors there were well known for their laser surgeries, offering a chance to be free of glasses once and for all. However, just a week before our departure, the news broke with shocking reports. Turkey had been hit by a series of devastating earthquakes. Every channel we turned to was filled with images of chaos and destruction. Entire buildings reduced to rubble, thousands dead, and countless missing. It was a nightmare unfolding before our eyes. Before we left, donation drives were happening everywhere. People were gathering supplies to send to those in need, clothes, food, anything that could offer some relief to the survivors. The sheer scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Trucks full of goods were being shipped to Turkey, but I couldn't help but think about the people trapped under the debris, enduring the harsh winter cold without shelter. The day of our flight arrived. At the boarding gate, we noticed a large number of volunteers heading to Turkey as well. Backpacks adorned with Red Cross symbols, people prepared to help in any way they could. These were doctors, rescue workers, and those experienced with natural disasters ready to face the unimaginable. Our flight was smooth, and we landed safely. The cold hit us immediately. Snow covered the ground, making me shiver at the thought of the earthquake victims enduring these freezing conditions. On the news, there were eerie stories, survivors talking about being rescued by long-dead relatives. It was hard to imagine how such trauma affected their minds, but one thing was clear. They were living in a nightmare. We rented a car and drove to our apartment, stopping at the clinic a few times to schedule the operation. The doctor explained the process. It was like peeling back the pages of a damaged book, the layers of the eye needing repair. The surgery went well, and I was given protective sunglasses and eye drops to use regularly. After that, we visited family in our hometown. They had no idea we were in Turkey, so we surprised them. We spent the night together, eating, drinking tea, and catching up. The following day, my father and I planned to attend a funeral. The weather was unforgiving. Snow, ice, and thick fog blanketed the roads. We stopped at an old building near the cemetery to use the restroom. The place was abandoned, cold, and eerie. Clothes were scattered everywhere, no sign of life inside. The windows had no glass, and the doors hung loose on their hinges. It was unsettling, to say the least. We called out but got no response. After using the restroom, we saw a figure rummaging through the piles of clothes. We called out again, hoping to ask for a towel, but the person didn't even look at us. Without saying a word, we left the building, feeling a strange sense of unease. When we arrived at the cemetery, we started visiting the graves of our deceased relatives. The first few went smoothly, but then came the last one. I was walking ahead of my father, searching for the grave, when I noticed something odd in the distance. As I climbed a small hill, I saw it, a large dog, or so I thought at first. "Dad, look," I whispered, "a Turkish shepherd." But as soon as I spoke, I realized my mistake. It wasn't just one dog, it was a pack of at least 24, rising from the ground, growling, their eyes fixed on us. Their fur bristled, saliva dripping from their mouths as they began to close in. Fear shot through me like ice. We were trapped. Without weapons or even a stick to defend ourselves, we knew we were in real danger. These weren't pets. They were wild, feral creatures. One wrong move, and they would tear us apart. We backed away slowly, but they started to circle us, cutting off our escape. Desperation set in. I spotted a small, walled grave nearby. My father and I rushed toward it, jumping inside just as the wolves charged. My father found a branch and began waving it at them, growling back, trying to scare them off. We shouted, made ourselves look bigger, anything to make them hesitate. For a moment, it worked. The wolves slowed, eyeing us cautiously, but we knew it wouldn't last. We had to get back to the car, fast. My heart pounded as we inched our way toward safety, never taking our eyes off the pack. They followed, but at a slower pace, still watching, still hungry. It was a miracle we reached the car in time. As soon as we slammed the doors shut, the wolves surrounded the vehicle, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. We had no choice but to abandon our final visit. As we drove away, we spoke with our family about the encounter. They told us how lucky we were. During this time of year, the wolves were particularly aggressive, hunting for food, preparing to breed. We had wandered straight into their den. It was a terrifying experience, one that still sends chills down my spine when I think about how close we came to becoming their prey. Here's the adjusted ending for both channels. As the darkness fades and the quiet settles in, you've wandered through another shadowed tale, leaving behind echoes of fear and fragments of mystery. But remember, the night never truly ends here. Whenever you close your eyes, these stories linger, waiting in the stillness, just beyond the edge of sleep. Until next time, when you dare to return to nightmare lullabies, or perhaps find yourself with Miss Nightmare, where your darkest dreams will once again be whispered into the night.